All right, let's dive into one of the most baffling and honestly heartbreaking mysteries in the history of aviation. We're talking about what really happened to MH370.
Just a few simple words. Good night, MAS 370. That was it. The last thing anyone ever heard from the cockpit. A totally normal sign-off that kicked off a silence that has been absolutely deafening ever since.
So picture this. It's just after 1 a.m., March 8, 2014. A huge Boeing 777 carrying 239 people is on its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, was super experienced, 53 years old. Everything about this was completely routine, just a normal flight on a normal night. Or so everyone thought.
And then, poof, it disappears from civilian radar right over the South China Sea. So where did it go? That's the question, right? The one that's kept investigators and families up at night for years. How does a massive, modern jet just vanish? Okay, let's break down what we actually know.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we have to go back to the very last moment when everything was still certain. Those final minutes where it was all just business as usual.
So here's the timeline. Takeoff is at 12:42 a.m. Everything's fine. 40 minutes into the flight, they cross the Malaysian coast, all systems go. Then at 1:19, Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control does a standard handover. Hey, contact Ho Chi Minh. Good night. The pilot gives that calm good night back. And then, nothing. Just 2 minutes later, right as it's supposed to pop up on Vietnamese radar, its transponder just stops. It literally just blinked off the screen.
So naturally, the first place everyone looked was right there, in the South China Sea, where the plane was last seen. And this wasn't some small operation. We're talking a massive international effort. 34 ships, 28 aircraft from 7 different countries, all combing the area. And you know what they found? Nothing. Not a single piece of wreckage. Absolutely no trace. And this is where the story takes its first huge, shocking twist. Because while the whole world is looking in the South China Sea, a new piece of information pops up, and it changes absolutely everything. It turns out, even though civilian radar lost the plane, Malaysian military radar had kept tracking something, an unidentified blip. And after a few days, they realized that blip was MH370. It hadn't just dropped out of the sky. No, it had made a hard, deliberate turn and was flying back the way it came.
So look at this. This is wild. You've got civilian radar saying, poof, it's gone, at 1:21 a.m. over the South China Sea. But then you have military radar that says, nope, we tracked it for another hour, flying west in the complete opposite direction. Its last known point on that radar was way over the Strait of Malacca. And then, gone again, vanished from that radar too.
But here's the thing, the plane wasn't totally silent. Even with its main comms offline, one little piece of equipment was still automatically trying to check in with a satellite owned by a company called Inmarsat. It was sending out these little hourly pings, like a digital heartbeat. Now these pings didn't have any location data, just a signal. But investigators, and this is brilliant, they used the time it took for that signal to travel back and forth to do some pretty mind-blowing reverse math.
And this is what all that math gave them. They took 7 of those handshakes and were able to plot these huge arcs on a map showing where the plane could have been at each ping. The very last ping created what's now famous as the 7th arc. And that arc, that final point of contact, suggested the plane kept flying for hours until it ran out of fuel somewhere in a vast, desolate stretch of the southern Indian Ocean.
Just think about that. The search area just shifted by thousands of kilometers, from the warm waters of the South China Sea to one of the most remote and hostile oceans on the planet. And this kicked off what would become the world's biggest and most difficult search.
$160 million. Just let that number sink in. That's how much was spent on the official search. It is by far the most expensive search in the history of aviation. That tells you everything you need to know about how huge and difficult this challenge was.
So the search shifted from looking on the surface to this incredibly difficult deep-sea mission. They were mapping a totally unknown part of the ocean floor, full of underwater volcanoes and massive cliffs. But even after 3 long years, the official search was suspended. They found nothing. But it wasn't a complete dead end, because in July 2015, a piece of the plane's wing, a flopperon, washed up on Reunion Island, way over near Africa. And that was the first concrete proof that MH370 really did go down in the Indian Ocean. Okay,
So, with the physical search basically at a standstill, the focus shifted from where the plane was to why it disappeared. What happened inside that cockpit? And that's where three major theories really start to take shape.
All right, let's go through them. Theory number 1, intentional pilot action. The big piece of evidence here is that sharp 180-degree turn that had to be done manually by someone who knew what they were doing. Plus, a similar flight path was supposedly found on the captain's home flight simulator. But the flip side is, everyone said he was a highly respected senior pilot. No red flags, no history of any problems. Okay, theory number 2, hijacking. For a while, people focused on 2 passengers who were using stolen passports. But that idea kind of fell apart when Interpol confirmed they were most likely just asylum seekers, not terrorists. And that brings us to theory number 3, the ghost flight or hypoxia theory. This is the idea that some event, maybe a fire or a sudden depressurization, knocked everyone out from a lack of oxygen. The plane then just kept flying on autopilot, a ghost flight, until it ran out of fuel. It explains that long, steady flight south, but there's just no direct evidence of what could have caused it.
And for years, that's pretty much where the story ended. The search was cold, the theories were just theories. It really seemed like this was one mystery that was just destined to remain unsolved forever. But then, some incredible new technology offered a tiny glimmer of hope.
Right, so a totally new way of analyzing data has come into play. And this one might be able to point us directly to the plane's final resting place.
Okay, the tech is pretty complex, but here's the simple version. Think of the whole world as being crisscrossed by this invisible web of weak amateur radio signals. They're just constantly bouncing around. Now, when something big, like say a Boeing 777, flies through this web, it creates a tiny disturbance, a ripple. This system, called WSPR-net, is designed to detect those exact ripples. It's basically like a giant invisible tripwire system for aircraft.
So this aerospace engineer, Richard Godfrey, did something pretty amazing. He went back and dug through all the archived WSPR data from that specific night. He literally built a program to hunt for those tiny disturbances, looking for a signal that would match the exact path of a 777 flying along the route those satellite pings suggested.
And what he found is, well, pretty remarkable. His analysis points to a very, very specific spot right there on the 7th arc. We're talking about 2,000 kilometers west of Australia in water that's 4 kilometers, that's 2.5 miles deep, and it's in this really rugged area with underwater ridges, a spot that could have easily been missed by the earlier sonar scans. And here's the real kicker. When scientists ran models to see where debris would have to start to end up where it did, their results pointed to this same exact area. It all lines up.
So that's where we are right now. We have this new, incredibly specific target, a search area that's just a tiny fraction of the original one. And it leaves us with this one massive question. Could this new evidence, within this concentrated 40 nautical mile radius, finally be enough to launch one more search? And could it, finally, after all these years, give 239 families the answers they've waited so long for,